The judge banged his heavy wooden gavel and ordered me to remove my Navy cross. The entire courtroom fell dead silent. My sister-in-law dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue and smirked from behind it. I did not argue. I said absolutely nothing. I simply unpinned the highest honor of my military career and laid it flat on the mahogany table. But what that corrupt judge and my traitorous family did not know was that taking off my medal was just the first step in a plan that would permanently destroy their lives and land them behind bars. Before I share how I destroyed their perfect lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you love seeing toxic people get exactly what they deserve. The air inside the Washington District courtroom felt thick and sterile. I stood perfectly straight in my tailored black silk suit, my posture reflecting 20 years of strict naval discipline. At 38 years old, I had commanded intelligence units, thwarted international cyber attacks, and faced down foreign threats without breaking a single sweat. Yet here I was, standing in a civil court, watching my own flesh and blood try to legally strip me of my sanity, my wealth, and my dignity. Across the center aisle sat my older brother Marcus. He was 39, impeccably dressed in a custom Navy suit, playing the role of the deeply concerned and wealthy investment banker. Growing up, Marcus was my parents' golden child, the perfect son who could do no wrong. Beside him sat his wife Chloe. Chloe was a 34-year-old white social media influencer with blonde hair extensions and a profound talent for weaponizing her tears. Today she was giving the performance of a lifetime. Chloe gripped Marcus by the arm, trembling her shoulders, as if she were in actual physical danger. She buried her face in a lace handkerchief, letting out small theatrical sobs that echoed off the high vaulted ceiling of the courtroom. Her lawyer, a slick man with a booming voice and a predatory stance, pointed an accusing finger directly at me. "Your Honor, my client is severely distressed," the lawyer announced loudly. "She is a fragile mother of two, and she is currently experiencing extreme emotional trauma due to the defendant's intimidating demeanor. We respectfully request that the defendant be ordered to remove her military decorations. That Navy Cross is an aggressive display of military authority, and it is being used to psychologically terrorize my client." I stared at the lawyer, my face a mask of absolute calm. "A Navy Cross is not a prop. It is a recognition of extreme valor awarded to me by the President of the United States after my unit dismantled a global money laundering syndicate in a highly classified operation. I had bled for that medal. I had lost good friends for that medal. And now a woman who spent her days filming makeup tutorials was claiming my medal was a weapon of psychological warfare. It was a classic display of weaponized fragility designed to make the strong, independent black woman look like a dangerous threat. I shifted my gaze to Judge Sterling. He sat high on his bench, peering down at me over his gold-rimmed reading glasses. Judge Sterling was a fixture in the Washington elite circle, a frequent golf partner of my father, and a man whose offshore bank accounts I already knew were hiding incredibly dark secrets. He leaned forward, his expression full of fake sympathy for Chloe and thinly veiled contempt for me. "Miss Jackson," Judge Sterling said, his voice dripping with condescension, "this is a civil dispute regarding your mental fitness to manage the family trust. This is not a military tribunal. I must agree with the plaintiff's counsel. Your display of military hardware is unnecessary and clearly agitating your sister-in-law. Please remove the medal immediately or I will hold you in contempt of court." A low murmur rippled through the gallery behind me. Even my own lawyer stiffened, opening his mouth to object to the blatant disrespect. I held up a single hand, stopping my lawyer instantly. "In the military, you learn to read the battlefield before you strike. You learn that sometimes letting the enemy think they have won is the most lethal strategy you can possibly deploy." I looked over at Chloe. She lowered her handkerchief just a fraction of an inch, revealing a triumphant, wicked smirk. She thought she had broken me. She thought her fragile performance had successfully conquered a woman who had dedicated her life to serving her country. Beside her, Marcus refused to meet my eyes. He stared at the floor, a coward hiding behind his wife's performance because he was too weak to fight his own battles. Slowly and deliberately, I raised my hands to my left lapel. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the rustle of my silk suit. My fingers gripped the heavy metal of the Navy Cross. I unclasped the pin. I did not let my hands shake. I did not show a single ounce of the fury boiling in my blood. I pulled the metal free from the dark fabric and lowered it to the table. The heavy metal made a sharp, echoing clink against the solid wood. I looked back up at Judge Sterling. My eyes locked onto his cold and completely unyielding. "I am perfectly happy to remove it, Your Honor," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. I would hate to make anyone in this room feel intimidated by the truth. Judge Sterling gave a curt nod, highly satisfied with his public display of power. He adjusted his black robes, completely unaware that by forcing me to take off that medal, he had just sealed his own fate. They all thought they had stripped me of my armor. They had no idea I was just clearing the way to drop a payload that would obliterate their entire world. The sharp clink of the heavy metal against the courtroom table echoed in my mind, shifting seamlessly into the delicate chime of a silver fork striking a crystal wine glass. 3 months ago, Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' sprawling estate in Potomac, Maryland. The air in their formal dining room was thick with the scent of roasted turkey, expensive sage stuffing, and absolute suffocating hypocrisy. I sat near the far end of the long mahogany table, perfectly still, watching the performance unfold. My mother Vivian sat at the head of the table like a queen presiding over her royal court. She wore a custom-tailored emerald gown that matched the meticulously curated decor of her home. Vivian was a master of the Washington social scene, a woman who treated every family gathering not as a moment of connection, but as a high-stakes political fundraiser where appearances were the only currency that mattered. Our family was part of the African-American elite in the district, a status my mother protected with ruthless aggression. My father, Harold, a retired surgeon with a penchant for expensive cigars and absolute conflict avoidance, sat opposite her, quietly carving his meat. Between them were Marcus and Chloe, holding court as the undeniable stars of the Jackson family. Marcus was swirling a glass of $200 Cabernet, laughing a little too loudly at a joke my father had just made. He wore the confidence of a man who had never faced a single consequence in his entire life. Growing up, Marcus was the golden child. He was the handsome, charismatic son who was destined to carry the family legacy. The fact that he was currently a glorified middle manager at an investment bank who spent more time on the golf course than at his desk was irrelevant to my mother. He had provided her with the ultimate accessory, the perfect photogenic family. Chloe sat beside him, holding her phone up to record a perfectly angled video of the table setting for her hundreds of thousands of followers. She smiled brightly for the camera, her blonde hair catching the light of the crystal chandelier, playing the flawless, cultured daughter-in-law. She adjusted her designer blouse, leaned her head against Marcus' shoulder, and captured the ideal image of domestic bliss. To the outside world, she was a lifestyle guru promoting wellness and family values. Inside this house, she was a highly calculated opportunist who knew exactly how to manipulate my parents' desperate need for social perfection. I was quietly eating my meal, choosing to observe rather than engage. As a former naval intelligence officer, reading a room was second nature to me. You learn to spot the invisible tripwires before anyone steps on them. The tension hovering just beneath the polite laughter was palpable. Marcus kept darting nervous glances at me from across the table, his knee bouncing restlessly under the mahogany wood. He was drinking his wine much faster than usual. Chloe kept touching his arm in a way that screamed calculated reassurance rather than genuine affection. They had a plan. I could feel the ambush coming before anyone even cleared their throat. It started when the catered waitstaff cleared the main course plates and brought out the dessert. Chloe set her phone face down on the table, folded her manicured hands, and let out a long, heavily rehearsed sigh. She looked at my mother with wide, incredibly sympathetic eyes. "Vivian, this dinner has been absolutely beautiful," Chloe said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and deep concern. "It just makes me realize how important family support is, especially during difficult times. We have so much to be thankful for, but we also have a responsibility to look out for the people we love when they cannot look out for themselves." My mother leaned forward, her interest instantly piqued by the dramatic tone. "Whatever do you mean, Chloe?" Is everything all right with the children? Oh, the kids are perfect, Chloe replied, placing a hand delicately over her heart. It is actually Nia we have been worrying about. Marcus and I have been talking for weeks, and we are just so deeply concerned about her mental health. The room went completely still. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I slowly lowered it, locking my gaze on my sister-in-law. Chloe did not look at me. She kept her focus entirely on my parents, playing the role of the deeply burdened, caring family member to absolute perfection. Marcus has been losing sleep over it. Chloe continued, her voice trembling slightly to add the right amount of vulnerability. We know how much trauma Nia went through during her deployments. War changes people. We have been reading so much about combat-induced PTSD, and it breaks our hearts to see her carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She is so isolated, Vivian. She works all the time at that cybersecurity firm of hers, and she never lets anyone in. It is a classic trauma response. I remained perfectly silent, waiting for the real agenda to drop. I did not have PTSD. I had transitioned into civilian life, seamlessly building a highly lucrative company and managing my life with absolute precision. But I knew exactly what narrative they were trying to weave. Chloe was using therapy buzzwords to sound compassionate while actively painting me as an unstable, broken veteran. And there it was, the strike. That is why we think it is completely unfair to force Nia to continue managing the family trust. Chloe announced, her eyes shimmering with manufactured tears. $15 million is a massive financial burden. The stress of monitoring markets, handling investments, and dealing with that kind of wealth is simply too much for someone battling severe military trauma. It is dangerous for her health. Marcus and I want to step up. We want to take over the management of the trust, so Nia can finally rest and focus on getting the psychiatric help she so desperately needs. We just want her to be safe. The sheer audacity of the pitch was breathtaking. They were executing a hostile takeover of the $15 million family trust right over dessert. They were using my distinguished military service as a weapon to brand me mentally incompetent. They needed control of those funds, and Chloe was providing the perfect socially acceptable excuse of mental health awareness to facilitate the robbery. I looked at my mother, expecting her to shut down this ridiculous performance. I expected Vivian to demand respect for the daughter who had successfully managed the family's assets for years. Instead, Vivian clasped her hands together, her face washing over with dramatic performed relief. "Oh, Chloe," Vivian breathed out, shaking her head. "You have no idea how glad I am that you finally said it." I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. Vivian turned her sharp, calculating eyes toward me, stripping away any pretense of maternal warmth. "Nia, your sister-in-law is absolutely right. We have all been walking on eggshells around you since you retired from the Navy. You are always so rigid, so cold, so incapable of living a normal life. Managing $15 million is a man's job anyway. It requires a level of economic strategy and level-headedness that Marcus possesses." Vivian waved her hand dismissively in my direction. "Marcus has a business degree. He is a vice president at his bank. He has a wife and children to secure a future for. You are a 38-year-old single woman living alone with the ghosts of a war zone. You have no husband, no children, and no real future to build for this family. It is time to hand over the reins. Let your brother do what he was born to do." The betrayal stung sharp and precise. They were rewriting history to fit their greedy narrative, entirely willing to declare me insane just to give the golden child access to the vault. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I did not give my mother the satisfaction of seeing a single crack in my composure. In the world of intelligence and cybersecurity, the person who loses their temper loses the war. I picked up my crystal water glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and set it back down precisely on the coaster. The ice clinked softly, the only sound in the suffocating silence of the dining room. "Born to manage wealth. Mother," I asked, my tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. I shifted my gaze to my brother. Marcus had gone entirely rigid. The confident smirk he wore just moments ago had vanished, replaced by a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. Tell me, Marcus, were you born to manage the family legacy, or were you born to incinerate it? Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I do not know what you are talking about, Nia. Yes, you do, I said, leaning forward just a fraction of an inch. Let us talk about your unparalleled business acumen. Let us talk about what happened exactly 2 years ago, right before Father begged me to step in and take over the trust. You convinced him to let you diversify the portfolio. You took $3 million in liquid family assets and dumped them into a decentralized offshore cryptocurrency scheme run by a group of men you met at a networking mixer. Marcus turned a mottled shade of gray. His eyes darted toward Chloe, who suddenly looked very confused. That part of the family history had conveniently been omitted from their pillow talk. The market was volatile. Vivian interrupted, her voice shrill as she rushed to defend her golden child. Anyone could have made a bad investment. It was a learning experience for him. It was a Ponzi scheme, Mother, I corrected her, my voice slicing through her excuses like a scalpel. He did not read the prospectus. He did not run a single background check. He wired $3 million to a shell company in the Bahamas and lost every single penny in 72 hours. He nearly bankrupted the family foundation. I spent the next 18 months working 80-hour weeks, leveraging every contact I had at the Pentagon and in the private security sector to track down the fraudulent accounts, recover a fraction of the principal, and entirely rebuild the trust from the ground up. I grew it to $15 million, while Marcus was busy pretending to be a financial genius on the golf course. I turned my eyes back to Chloe. She was staring at Marcus, her jaw tight. I smiled at her, a cold, predatory smile. So tell me, Chloe, did your husband mention the $3 million deficit when he was promising you a life of endless luxury? Did he mention that I am the only reason his credit cards do not bounce? Or is that exactly why you are sitting here today, playing the role of the concerned wife, desperately trying to declare me mentally incompetent so you can get your hands on the vault before the money runs out? Marcus slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware. You arrogant, miserable woman! He shouted, his face twisting with rage. You think you are better than everyone else just because you wear a uniform? You think you own us. I do not own you, Marcus, I replied smoothly. I simply refuse to fund your delusions. Chloe realized in that exact moment that her carefully constructed narrative of the fragile, concerned sister-in-law was collapsing. The facts were irrefutable. I had dismantled her psychological ambush with raw financial data. She could not argue the numbers, so she had to change the battlefield entirely. She had to shift the focus from her husband's financial incompetence to my supposed aggression. She needed a victim, and she needed a villain. Chloe abruptly stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. Her face flushed a deep, blotchy red. She grabbed her wineglass filled to the brim with dark Cabernet. Without a single word of warning, she hurled the contents directly across the table. The dark red liquid hit me square in the chest. It splashed across my pristine white silk blouse, soaking instantly into the expensive fabric, dripping down my collarbone and staining my blazer. Before I could even process the physical shock of the cold wine hitting my skin, Chloe dropped the empty crystal glass. It shattered against the edge of the mahogany table, sending shards raining down onto the expensive rug. Then she began to scream. Stop looking at me like that! Chloe shrieked, backing away from the table, her hands clutching her head as if I had just drawn a weapon on her. Marcus, help me. She is scaring me. Look at her eyes. I had not moved a single muscle. I was sitting perfectly still, wine dripping from my chin onto my ruined silk shirt. I was not glaring. I was not shouting. I was simply observing her. She is having an episode. Chloe sobbed, her voice reaching a hysterical, breathless pitch as she hid behind Marcus' broad shoulders. She is using her military interrogation tactics on us. She is violent. Marcus, she is going to hurt me. Get me out of here. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She had just physically assaulted me with a glass of wine, yet she was screaming as if I were the one attacking her. She was weaponizing the dangerous black veteran stereotype, twisting my absolute stillness into a threat, and using her tears to demand protection from a danger that did not exist. Vivian immediately rushed out of her chair running, not to me, the daughter who had just been assaulted, but to Chloe. "Oh, my poor dear Vivian," cooed, wrapping her arms around her weeping daughter-in-law. "It is okay, you are safe here." Harold finally stood up, his face pale, his hands trembling. He looked at me, wine soaking my chest, and instead of asking if I was all right, his face hardened with disappointment. "Look what you have done, Nia," my father said, his voice trembling with misplaced anger. "Look at the chaos you bring into this house. Chloe was just trying to help you, and you terrorize her. You are completely out of control." I looked down at the dark red stain spreading across my heart. They did not see the wine thrown at me. They only saw the tears falling from Chloe's eyes. In their desperate need to protect their perfect image, they had completely abandoned reality. My father had spent his entire career in operating rooms, making life-or-death decisions with absolute precision. He was a man who prided himself on logic, steady hands, and clear facts. Yet here in his own dining room, he was completely paralyzed by the manufactured tears of a white influencer and the fragile ego of his failure of a son. I looked directly into his eyes, waiting for a shred of the integrity he always preached about. I waited for him to point out that Chloe had just physically assaulted me. I waited for him to remind my mother that I was the one who salvaged the family fortune when Marcus nearly burned it to the ground. Instead, Harold cleared his throat and looked away from me. He focused his gaze on the shattered crystal on the floor, deliberately avoiding the sight of the dark wine soaking into my blouse. "You need to apologize, Nia," he said. The words were quiet, but they struck with the force of a physical blow. "You provoked them. You came into this dinner looking for a fight, throwing past mistakes in your brother's face. Chloe is right. The stress of your military background is making you hostile. It is best for everyone if you just sign the trust over to Marcus and take some time to seek professional help." The hypocrisy took my breath away. I stood up slowly. The dark red wine dripped from the hem of my ruined silk blazer, staining the expensive Persian rug beneath my feet. I did not bother to wipe it away. The stain was fitting. It was a perfect visual representation of the toxic rot that had infected this family for decades. Vivian was still stroking Chloe's hair, casting venomous glares in my direction, while murmuring soothing words to the woman who had just attacked me. Marcus stood taller now that our father had validated his victimhood. He looked at me with a sickening expression of triumph, safe under the protective umbrella of our parents' blatant favoritism. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level, "you know exactly what happened 2 years ago. You came to my house in the middle of the night, terrified of losing your legacy because your son gambled it away. You asked me to save you, and I did. I saved this family." Harold shifted his weight, crossing his arms over his chest to build a barrier between us. "That is ancient history," he muttered, his voice devoid of any backbone. "Marcus has grown since then. He is a family man now. He needs this responsibility to secure his future. We are asking you to step down peacefully. If you refuse, you leave us no choice but to support Marcus and Chloe in taking legal action to protect the estate from your instability." They were threatening me. My own parents were threatening to drag me into a courtroom and declare me mentally unfit, all to protect the golden child from the consequences of his own financial incompetence. They were perfectly willing to destroy my reputation, jeopardize my national security clearance, and ruin my company just to maintain the illusion of Marcus as the perfect heir. I looked at the four of them: Vivian with her ruthless social ambition, Harold with his pathetic cowardice, Marcus with his unearned arrogance, Chloe with her weaponized tears. They were not my family. They were a liability. And in my line of work, you eliminate liabilities before they compromise the mission. I did not shout. I did not cry. Crying was for people who relied on pity to win their battles. I picked up my purse from the back of my chair. I pulled a crisp white linen napkin from the table and deliberately wiped the wet wine from my hands. I tossed the stained cloth directly onto Marcus' empty dessert plate. "You want the trust?" I said, my voice echoing coldly in the quiet dining room. "You want to drag my name through the mud and use my military service as a weapon against me? Fine. But understand this very clearly. You are not dealing with a fragile woman you can bully into submission. You are dealing with a former intelligence officer. I do not play family games. I play to win, and when I am done there will be nothing left of this perfect little illusion you have built. I turned my back on them and walked out of the dining room. I heard my mother gasp, deeply insulted by my absolute refusal to bow to her authority. I heard Marcus mutter something cowardly under his breath. I did not stop. I walked through the grand foyer, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, and pushed open the heavy mahogany front door. The cold November air hit my face the moment I stepped outside. The icy wind bit into my wine-soaked clothes, but I welcomed the chill. It cleared my head. It sharpened my focus. I walked down the sweeping driveway to my car, the crisp crunch of gravel under my boots, marking the final end of my ties to the Jackson family. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. The quiet hum of the engine filled the night. I sat there for a moment, gripping the leather steering wheel. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought a lawsuit and a smear campaign would force me to surrender the $15 million trust. They had no idea. They had just declared war on a woman who specialized in destroying high-level targets without leaving a single fingerprint behind. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I bypassed my standard contacts and opened a heavily encrypted messaging application I had not used since my days at the Pentagon. I typed a single highly classified message to the lead investigator at my cybersecurity firm. Initiate a full financial sweep on Marcus Jackson and his wife Chloe. Dig into every offshore account, every hidden asset, and every business associate they have. They just made a fatal mistake, and I want everything we can use to bury them. I hit send. The screen glowed briefly in the dark car before going black. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the estate, leaving my treacherous family behind. The silent war had officially begun, and I was going to ensure they lost absolutely everything. The morning sun glared off the floor-to-ceiling windows of my cybersecurity firm in downtown Washington. Aegis Cyber Solutions was my fortress. Every pane of glass was soundproofed, every server encrypted with military-grade architecture, and every employee vetted through rigorous background checks. It was an empire built on absolute control and undeniable facts, exactly the opposite of the Jackson family dynamic. I was reviewing the preliminary financial dossiers my investigative team had pulled overnight when the heavy glass door to my private suite violently swung open. Marcus barged past my executive assistant, his chest heaving as if he had sprinted all the way from Potomac. The pristine, confident investment banker from the night before was entirely gone. His tie was loosened, his designer shirt was wrinkled at the collar, and dark circles bruised the skin beneath his panicked eyes. He looked exactly like what he was, a cornered animal. Cornered. My assistant stepped into the doorway, her hand hovering over the silent alarm beneath her clipboard. "I am so sorry, Captain Jackson," she said, her voice steady but alert. He bypassed the reception desk before security could intercept. I raised a single hand, signaling her to stand down. "It is fine, Sarah. Close the door behind you. Hold all my calls." The thick glass door clicked shut, sealing Marcus and me in absolute silence. He marched directly to my desk, his breathing ragged, and slammed a thick manila folder onto the pristine mahogany surface. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet room. "Sign it!" Nia Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of false authority and raw desperation. I did not flinch. I did not even look at the folder. I kept my eyes locked on his face, studying the erratic pulse throbbing at his temple and the fine tremor shaking his hands. "You look terrible, Marcus," I said mildly, leaning back in my ergonomic leather chair. "Did you not sleep well after your magnificent performance at dinner?" "Cut the attitude," he snapped, slamming his palm flat against the legal documents. "These are the trust transfer papers. Our parents already signed their portions of the addendum this morning. You are the only signature missing. Sign the damn papers and hand over the $15 million so we can all move on from this nightmare." I picked up my silver-engraved pen, holding it loosely between my fingers. I let the silence stretch, watching the way he shifted his weight from foot to foot. If I was truly suffering from severe mental instability, As you and your wife so passionately claimed last night, any signature I provide would be legally void under duress and diminished capacity. But we both know this has absolutely nothing to do with my mental health. I dropped the pen. It hit the desk with a sharp clatter. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool surface. So tell me the truth, little brother. Why are you sweating through a $3,000 suit at 9 in the morning? Why are you bypassing the family attorneys and storming into my office like a man with a gun to his head? Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, his broad shoulders suddenly sagging. The aggressive posture dissolved, leaving behind a terrified boy who had spent his entire life being bailed out by other people. You do not understand, he whispered, his voice dropping to a frantic, breathless pitch. I need that money, Naya. I need it today. I already know about the $3 million you lost in the crypto scheme, I reminded him coldly. The trust has recovered. You are cut off from the primary accounts. Your lifestyle is secure as long as you live within your bank salary. It is not just the $3 million, Marcus choked out, gripping the edge of my desk so hard his knuckles turned white. The confession tore out of him ragged and ugly. That was just the beginning. I tried to win it back. I thought if I could just leverage a larger position, I could replace the missing funds before mother and father noticed. The traditional banks would not touch me after the first loss. So I went elsewhere. My eyes narrowed. Define elsewhere, Marcus. He swallowed hard, refusing to meet my gaze. Private lenders, underground creditors operating out of Miami and Eastern Europe. People who do not care about credit scores, Nia. They care about collateral. I borrowed $5 million to cover the margins on a massive short sell. I was so sure the market would crash. I was so sure I could double the money, pay them back, and return the $3 million to the trust. And you lost it all, I stated. It was not a question. It was a mathematical certainty. Every single cent, he confessed, a tear finally spilling over his eyelashes. And these people, Nia, they do not send collection letters. They send pictures of my house. They sent a photo of Chloe walking to her yoga studio. They told me I have 48 hours to wire the $5 million plus exorbitant interest, or they will start liquidating my assets themselves. And they made it very clear they do not mean my bank accounts. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the sheer magnitude of his stupidity. The golden child had mortgaged his life to dangerous, unregulated lenders because his ego could not handle admitting a financial loss. And Chloe, I asked, my tone razor sharp. Does the grieving, terrified wife know that her husband has put a target on her back? Marcus let out a bitter, broken laugh that sounded more like a sob. Of course she knows. They sent the photos directly to her phone last week. That is why we orchestrated the dinner last night. That is why she threw the wine. We needed an excuse to force you out immediately. I watched him closely. And how did she react when she found out the man providing her perfect lifestyle was in massive debt? She gave me an ultimatum, Marcus said, his voice hollowing out into pure defeat. She did not care about the danger, Nia. She only cared about the money. She told me that if I do not get control of the $15 million trust today, she is taking the kids. She is going to file for an emergency divorce, take my sons back to her hometown, and expose my debts to the public. She will destroy my career, ruin the family name, and take the only grandchildren mother and father have ever cared about. She knows mother will do absolutely anything to keep those mixed-race, photogenic grandchildren in the country club photos. Chloe is using the kids as leverage to force mother and father to pressure you into signing. The puzzle pieces locked together with flawless, horrifying precision. Chloe was not a victim. She was the ultimate opportunist. She realized Marcus was a sinking ship, so she demanded access to my life raft. If she got the trust, she would pay off the $5 million, take the remaining $10 million for herself, and secure her luxurious lifestyle. My parents were so desperate to keep the illusion of the perfect family intact, so terrified of Chloe taking away their prized grandchildren, that they were entirely willing to sacrifice my sanity and my freedom to appease her. I looked at the legal folder on my desk. Then I looked up at the pathetic, trembling man standing before me. You want me to hand over $15 million? I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register, so you can pay off 5 million to violent creditors and hand the rest to a woman who is actively holding your children hostage for a payout. Nia, please. Marcus begged, tears openly streaming down his face. He actually fell to his knees, his designer suit pooling on my office floor. You have to save me. If I do not wire the funds, these people will ruin me. Chloe will leave me. Mother and father will never survive the public scandal. You are the strong one. You always fix things. Just sign the paper. Let me have the trust. I will pay you back, I swear. I stared down at him. A 40-year-old man kneeling on the floor begging the sister he had just tried to institutionalize to save his life. There was no remorse for throwing wine in my face. There was no apology for trying to brand me with combat trauma. There was only the selfish, parasitic need to consume my resources to mask his failures. I reached out and placed my hand firmly on top of the manila folder. Marcus let out a breathless sigh of relief, thinking he had won. Thinking the loyal, protective military sister was going to fall on the grenade to save the family. I picked up the folder, stepped out from behind my desk, and dropped it directly onto his lap where he knelt on the floor. No, I said. Marcus froze, his tear-streaked face staring up at me in absolute shock. What? I said no. I repeated, my voice echoing with finality. You made a $5 million bet with dangerous people, Marcus. You married a woman who treats your children like bargaining chips. You allowed our parents to humiliate me, and you tried to steal my command over this family's assets. I am not a bank. I am not a human shield. And I am absolutely not going to fund your ransom. But they will destroy me, he gasped, clutching the folder to his chest. Chloe will take the boys. Then I suggest you call a good divorce lawyer and start liquidating your vintage car collection, I replied, walking to the door and pulling it open. My assistant stood right outside, flanked by 2 towering security guards in tactical suits. You are dead to me! Marcus spat, scrambling to his feet, his face twisting with a desperate, venomous hatred as the guards stepped into the room. You are going to lose everything for this. Chloe is taking this to court. We will freeze your accounts. We will destroy your security clearance. You will rot in a psych ward. Escort him out. I told the guards, completely ignoring his threats. If he sets foot in this building again, have him arrested for trespassing. I watched them drag my screaming, thrashing brother down the pristine glass hallway. He was going to court. He was going to use Chloe's tears and my parents' money to try and bury me. He thought he had the upper hand because he was backed into a corner. But he had fundamentally misunderstood the rules of engagement. You do not threaten an intelligence officer with a lawsuit. You only give them an invitation to go to war. I returned to my penthouse overlooking the Washington Monument just after 8 that evening. I needed absolute silence to strategize my next operational moves. But peace is a rare luxury you cannot afford when your own family operates like a hostile syndicate. When the private elevator doors chimed open directly into my foyer, I did not find an empty, quiet apartment. I found my parents. The security concierge downstairs had apparently yielded to my mother's imperious, demanding attitude, allowing her to bypass standard protocol. Vivian was pacing aggressively across my imported Brazilian hardwood floors, her designer heels clicking sharply like the ticking of a bomb. Harold stood silently by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the illuminated city skyline, a glass of my premium aged scotch already resting in his hand. Vivian wasted no time. She marched straight toward me the second I stepped out of the elevator, pulling a fresh, thick manila envelope from her oversized leather tote bag. She slammed the documents onto the edge of my marble kitchen island with excessive force. We know exactly what you did to Marcus today. Vivian spat, her voice vibrating with a level of pure, unadulterated rage I had rarely seen. You had your own flesh and blood physically thrown out of your office by armed security guards. He came home to us completely broken, humiliated by his own sister. You are going to sign these papers right now, Nia. The transfer of the trust stops being a polite family request tonight. It is now a direct demand. I placed my leather briefcase on the counter, entirely unbothered by her elevated volume. I slowly unbuttoned my suit jacket and looked directly at my father. You poured yourself a rather large drink, Harold. Good. You are going to need every single drop of it. I turned my attention back to my mother, keeping my posture relaxed but dominant. Did Marcus tell you why he was crying on my office floor, Mother? Did he happen to mention the $5 million he currently owes to a syndicate of unlicensed private lenders operating out of Miami? Did he bring up the minor detail that Chloe is actively blackmailing him using your precious grandchildren as leverage to force him to secure the vault? I expected her to show shock. I expected a gasp, a denial, or even a moment of horrified realization that her perfect golden child had jeopardized their entire social standing. Instead, Vivian simply crossed her arms over her chest, her expression hardening into something entirely ruthless and deeply calculated. I know exactly what kind of financial trouble your brother is in, Vivian said coldly, not blinking once. And that is precisely why you need to sign over the trust immediately. He made a temporary mistake under immense market pressure. Those dangerous people are threatening his family now. Chloe is terrified, and she is entirely right to be. She is doing what any devoted mother would do to protect her babies. Marcus desperately needs this money to clear his ledger, satisfy his wife, and secure his marriage. I stared at her, genuinely astounded by the sheer, unfiltered magnitude of her delusion. I took a slow breath, absorbing the reality of her statement. You are openly asking me to hand over the family fortune to pay off violent loan sharks and satisfy a manipulative gold digger. You are entirely willing to ruin my life, compromise my security clearance, and declare me mentally incompetent just to save him from his own disastrous choices. Vivian stepped closer, her eyes blazing with absolute venom. She looked me up and down, her face contorting with deep, visceral disgust. Yes, she hissed the words slipping through her teeth like poison. Because Marcus has a family. He has a beautiful wife. He has 2 healthy sons who will carry the Jackson name and uphold our legacy in this city. What do you have, Nia? Look at yourself. You are nothing but a lonely 38-year-old woman with a pile of scrap metal medals. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Vivian leaned in closer, determined to inflict maximum emotional damage. You have no husband. You have no children. You have absolutely no legacy. You play soldier in your high-rise glass office, but at the end of the day, your life is entirely empty. Your military decorations do not make you a mother. They do not make you a wife. They are worthless pieces of scrap metal, just like your stubborn pride. You think your career makes you superior, but you are a barren, bitter woman who is trying to destroy the only real family Marcus has built. The cruelty in her voice was absolute. There was no motherly warmth left, only a desperate, vicious socialite fighting to protect her ultimate prize. I shifted my gaze to my father. He took a slow sip of his scotch, deliberately looking out the window, refusing to meet my eyes. He is your son too, Harold, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the sting her words had caused. Are you really going to stand there drinking my liquor and let her say that? Are you going to let her hand the legacy you built over to a woman who will drain it dry within a year? Harold finally set his glass down on the side table. He looked exhausted, yet resolute in his profound cowardice. Your mother is right, Nia, he said quietly, his voice lacking any backbone. Marcus is the future of this family. If Chloe leaves and takes the boys back to her family, we lose the grandsons. We lose everything that matters to our image. You have your successful cybersecurity company. You have enough personal wealth to take care of yourself for the rest of your life. Let Marcus have the trust. If you fight us on this, you leave us no choice. We will testify against you in court. We will stand before a judge and swear under oath that your military service left you paranoid, hostile, and totally unfit to manage finances. We will do whatever it takes to protect Marcus and keep those boys in our family. The final emotional cord snapped. The last remaining ounce of loyalty I held for the people who gave me life evaporated into the cold air of the penthouse. They were not my parents anymore. They were simply adversaries standing in my living room, actively threatening to commit perjury to destroy my reputation. They were willing to brand me a broken, traumatized veteran just to cover up a $5 million gambling debt. I walked over to the smart panel on the wall near the kitchen entrance. I pressed a single illuminated button. The heavy private elevator doors slid open behind them with a soft chime. "Get out of my home," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet absolute register. Vivian scoffed, picking up her leather tote bag. "You are making a massive mistake, Nia." "I said get out," I repeated, stepping toward them with the calculated predatory grace I had learned in active combat zones. "You have chosen your side. You have chosen the son who will bleed you completely dry and the daughter-in-law who will discard you the second the money runs out. You want to take me to court? Fine. I will see you all in court. And when I strip away every single asset you possess, when I expose exactly who you are to every country club, every charity board, and every high society friend you have in Washington, do not dare come crawling back to me." Vivian snatched her envelope from the counter, her face flushed with indignant rage. "You are no longer our daughter," she declared, lifting her chin with misplaced arrogance. "We will see you completely destroyed. You will end up with absolutely nothing." Harold did not say a word. He simply followed his wife into the elevator, keeping his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. The metal doors slid shut, sealing them inside, and severing my ties to the Jackson family permanently. I stood alone in the quiet expanse of my penthouse. The silence was absolute. My mother thought her words had broken me. She thought calling my metals scrap metal and attacking my single status would reduce me to tears. She was dead wrong. I walked over to the window, looking out at the sprawling capital city below. They wanted a legal bloodbath. They wanted to use the justice system to steal my authority. I picked up my phone and dialed the private number of my lead defense attorney. It was time to stop playing defense and start laying the ground wire for an explosion they would never see coming. I picked up my phone and dialed the private number of my lead defense attorney. Donovan answered on the first ring. I gave him a brief tactical rundown of the ambush in my penthouse and ordered him to prepare for an immediate legal assault. I expected Marcus and Chloe to move fast, driven by the panic of their $5 million debt. I did not expect them to move with such staggering, reckless audacity. 72 hours later, the strike landed. I was walking through the main lobby of Aegis Cyber Solutions, a cup of black coffee in my hand, when a man in a rumpled gray suit stepped directly into my path. My security detail instantly tensed, but the man simply thrust a thick manila envelope toward my chest. He confirmed my name, declared I had been served, and scurried out of the glass double doors before my guards could even lay a hand on him. I walked into my private office, locked the door, and dropped the heavy envelope onto my desk. I sliced it open with a letter opener and spread the documents out across the mahogany surface. The official seal of the Washington District Court glared back at me. Chloe had not just filed a standard petition to contest the trust. She had filed an emergency ex parte motion for temporary conservatorship. She and Marcus were listed as the primary petitioners, with my own parents attached as sworn witnesses. The narrative they spun across 50 pages of legal jargon was a masterpiece of fiction. They painted a horrifying portrait of a severely traumatized combat veteran who had completely lost her grip on reality. According to Chloe's sworn affidavit, the Thanksgiving dinner had ended with me experiencing a violent, unprovoked flashback. She claimed I had terrorized her, threatened her children, and exhibited deep signs of clinical paranoia. My mother had provided a supplemental declaration swearing under penalty of perjury that I had been suffering from undiagnosed PTSD for years, that I was financially reckless, and that I had recently hired armed mercenaries to physically assault my own brother. They had taken Marcus's cowardly breakdown in my office and weaponized it, twisting his forced removal into an act of military-grade aggression. But the lies were not the most dangerous part of the envelope. The danger lay in the signature at the bottom of the final page. Judge Sterling. He had not waited for a standard hearing. He had not summoned me to defend myself. Using his authority, and undoubtedly influenced by his decades-long friendship with my father, Sterling had rubber-stamped every single request Chloe made. The court orders were absolute and devastating. Judge Sterling had signed a temporary restraining order mandating that I remain at least 500 feet away from Marcus, Chloe, their children, and my parents. I was legally barred from making any contact with my own family. But the restraining order was just a smokescreen for the real objective. The financial rulings were the bullet to the chest. Judge Sterling had ordered an immediate temporary suspension of my authority over the $15 million family trust, transferring emergency administrative control directly to Marcus, pending a full psychological evaluation. Worse, Sterling had granted a malicious request to temporarily freeze all my personal bank accounts. The legal justification claimed it was a protective measure to prevent a mentally unstable veteran from liquidating assets during a psychiatric crisis. In reality, it was a coordinated strategy to completely cripple my ability to fight back. They wanted to cut off my oxygen, starve my legal defense fund, and leave me entirely defenseless. My office door clicked open. Donovan walked in, his usually impeccable posture rigid with tension. He threw his own copy of the court filings onto my desk, his face flushed with disbelief. "I have been practicing law in this district for 20 years, Donovan said, pacing across the room. "And I have never seen a judge approve an ex parte asset freeze of this magnitude without a shred of medical evidence." Sterling bypassed every standard protocol. He took the tearful word of a social media influencer and the sworn lies of your parents, and he weaponized the bench against you. I looked down at the documents, my expression perfectly flat. How long until the freeze hits my personal accounts? Donovan checked his watch, his jaw tight. "You have maybe 2 hours before the banks process the court order. Your business accounts for Aegis Cyber Solutions are protected under corporate law, but everything with your personal name on it is about to be locked down tight. They are trying to suffocate you, Nia. They want you desperate, broke, and begging for a settlement. Let them try," I replied calmly. Donovan stopped pacing and stared at me. "Nia, you are legally barred from touching your own money. You are ordered to undergo a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. If you refuse the evaluation, Sterling will hold you in contempt and make the conservatorship permanent. Marcus now has temporary access to the trust. If he wires that $5 million to his loan sharks, the money is gone forever. This is not a drill. We are bleeding." I stood up, smoothing the front of my suit. "In naval intelligence, Donovan, we operate under a very simple rule. When the enemy cuts your supply lines, it means they are terrified of what you can do with a full arsenal. They think taking my personal credit cards and slapping a restraining order on me makes me powerless. They forgot that my power does not come from a bank account. It comes from information." I walked over to my secure terminal and logged into my offshore emergency reserves, quietly routing funds through encrypted channels before Sterling's order could take effect. Then I turned back to my lawyer. "File an immediate appeal on the personal asset freeze," I instructed. "Tie up Marcus's temporary access to the trust with as much legal red tape as you can manufacture. Demand an independent auditor review the trust before a single cent can be dispersed. Buy me exactly 48 hours. Donovan frowned, pulling a notepad from his briefcase. "I can file injunctions to slow Marcus down, but Sterling will shoot them down eventually. He is clearly in Harold's pocket. What are you going to do in 48 hours? "I am going to stop playing by civilian rules," I said, picking up the court order and staring at the judge's signature. "My family wants to treat me like a dangerous military operative. It is time I gave them exactly what they asked for. I am not going to fight Marcus and Chloe. I am going to rip the head off the snake that just signed this court order." The legal ambush was designed to break me, to force me into a defensive crouch while they looted the family legacy. They believed the court system was their ultimate shield. They did not realize that I had spent my entire career dismantling corrupt systems from the inside out. I did not need my personal bank accounts to wage this war. I just needed my clearance, my network, and the absolute certainty that Judge Sterling had secrets much darker than a biased ruling. I dismissed Donovan and sat back down at my desk, the silence of my office wrapping around me like armor. The battle lines were drawn. My family had officially fired the first shot, and they had used a corrupt federal judge to pull the trigger. It was a bold, ruthless move, but it was also sloppy. And in my world, sloppy always gets you killed. The absolute silence of my office was shattered less than an hour later. My secure console chimed with a priority alert followed instantly by the frantic buzzing of the main switchboard outside my door. Sarah did not knock this time. She shoved the heavy glass door open, her usually perfect composure entirely gone. She was holding a tablet with knuckles that had turned completely white. She did not say a word. She simply placed the screen on my desk and hit play. Chloe had escalated the war from the courtroom to the court of public opinion. She had posted a video to her primary social media account, broadcasting it directly to her 3 million followers. It was a masterclass in the strategic deployment of weaponized fragility. Chloe sat on the plush white carpet of her son's nursery clutching a small stuffed bear. Her expensive designer makeup was scrubbed completely clean, replacing her usual glamorous aesthetic with the carefully curated look of a terrified, exhausted mother. She wore an oversized plain gray sweater that swallowed her frame, making her look incredibly small and vulnerable. She looked directly into the camera lens, her voice shaking with perfectly practiced fear. I did not want to make this video. Chloe wept a single flawless tear tracking down her pale cheek. But I am living in absolute terror and I do not know how else to protect my children. My family is being targeted by someone very powerful. A relative. A highly trained military veteran who is using her immense wealth, her security details, and her aggressive tactics to bully and terrorize us. She is trying to destroy my husband, and she is trying to take everything from my babies. I am just a mother trying to keep her family safe, but this woman is unstable, she is dangerous, and she is completely out of control. She covered her face with her hands, letting out a stifled, heartbreaking sob before the video abruptly cut to black. Chloe did not say my name. She did not explicitly mention Aegis Cyber Solutions or the $15 million trust. She did not have to. In the digital age, a breadcrumb trail is just as lethal as a direct accusation. Within 20 minutes, her rabid fan base of devoted followers had pieced together the clues she deliberately left behind. They cross-referenced her husband's family, found my military service record, and identified my company. The fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. My chief operating officer burst into my office right behind Sarah, his phone glued to his ear. The switchboard outside was lighting up like a Christmas tree. Aegis Cyber Solutions had been completely doxxed. Our company's social media pages were being flooded with tens of thousands of vicious comments, death threats, and coordinated bot attacks. A targeted campaign of fake one-star reviews was tanking our digital footprint in real time. The hashtag demanding my total cancellation was trending globally. Chloe's followers were tagging defense contractors, federal agencies, and our corporate partners, demanding they sever all ties with a company run by an abusive, unhinged warlord who terrorized innocent white mothers and children. They were calling for boycotts, demanding protests outside our headquarters, and flooding our investor relations inbox with demands for my immediate resignation. It is a highly coordinated digital mob, my chief operating officer said, hanging up his phone. His face was grim. 2 of our Tier 1 clients have already called. They are expressing deep concern over the sudden public relations nightmare. Our public partners are watching their stock dip because of the association. We are bleeding credibility by the second, Nia. We need to hire a crisis management firm immediately. We need to draft a press release, issue a categorical denial, and threaten a defamation lawsuit to force her to take the video down. I sat back in my leather chair, watching the video loop again on the tablet. I studied the lighting. I noted the calculated pauses in her speech. I saw exactly what she was doing. Chloe was playing a very old, very dangerous game. She was leaning entirely on a historical societal bias, weaponizing her tears to paint herself as the ultimate victim, while casting me as the aggressive, dangerous, hostile black woman. She knew the internet would not ask for court documents or financial statements. The internet loves a damsel in distress, and it loves to destroy a powerful woman even more. Marcus and my parents had undoubtedly given Chloe the green light to launch this digital strike. They were completely oblivious to the fact that they were burning down their own family name just to save Marcus from his massive gambling debts. They wanted to apply unbearable external pressure. If Judge Sterling's corrupt court orders could not break me fast enough, They wanted to ensure my company bled to death in the court of public opinion. They wanted me desperate broke and begging to sign over the $15 million trust just to make the nightmare stop. I reached out and pressed the power button on the tablet, cutting off Chloe's weeping face. "We are not hiring a crisis management firm," I said, my voice projecting absolute unshakable authority. "We are not issuing a press release, and we are certainly not sending a cease and desist letter. Implement a total media blackout across all corporate channels. Instruct the staff to ignore the switchboard turn-off comment sections and route all incoming client inquiries directly to my private line." My chief operating officer stared at me in disbelief. "Nia, with all due respect, if we let this narrative fester, it could cost us millions in contracts. She is actively destroying your reputation. We have to fight back." I stood up, adjusting the cuffs of my suit. "You fight back against a PR crisis," I told him. "You do not fight back against an intelligence-gathering operation. Let her talk. Let Chloe post every single lie she wants. Let her followers scream and let the media run wild with the story." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the street below, where a news van was already pulling up to the curb. Chloe thought she was playing three-dimensional chess. She thought her viral video was a checkmate. But she had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the war she had just started. "Every digital footprint she creates is a piece of evidence," I continued, my eyes tracking the reporters setting up their cameras on the sidewalk. "Every tear she sheds for the camera is an admission of guilt when placed next to the truth. She wants a public spectacle. She wants noise. But noise is just a diversion. While she is busy rallying a digital mob that has absolutely zero subpoena power, I am going to quietly dismantle the foundation her entire life is built upon." I turned away from the window and looked at my team. The panic in the room was palpable, but my absolute calm demanded their obedience. "Lock down the building," I ordered. "Let them scream outside our doors. The real battle is not happening on social media. It is happening in the shadows, and I am about to tear their entire empire apart from the inside out." The heavy glass doors of my executive suite sealed shut behind me, cutting off the frantic shouting of my crisis management team. I did not take the main elevators down to the lobby, where the press was currently swarming like vultures. Instead, I walked to the far end of the executive floor, pressing my palm against a seemingly blank wall panel. The biometric scanner hummed, reading my fingerprints, mapping my vascular structure, and verifying my thermal signature. A concealed steel door slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss. I stepped inside the private elevator car and swiped my security badge. The car did not go up and it did not stop at the ground floor. It plunged directly into the sub-basement of Aegis Cyber Solutions, dropping 50 feet below street level, into a bunker constructed of reinforced concrete and lined with copper mesh. This was my SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. It was a completely isolated environment impenetrable to external surveillance, electronic eavesdropping, or unauthorized network intrusion. This was where the civilian CEO ceased to exist, and the naval intelligence officer took absolute command. The elevator doors parted, revealing a cold, dimly lit room dominated by banks of high-powered servers and a massive wall of curved tactical monitors. I walked over to the primary command console and powered up the system. The screens flared to life, casting a stark blue glow across the quiet room. I bypassed the standard commercial servers, bypassing the civilian internet entirely. I routed my connection through a series of encrypted military proxies, masking my digital footprint in a labyrinth of ghost servers before pinging a highly secured satellite relay. I picked up the heavy black handset of the encrypted terminal. I dialed a sequence of 13 digits that did not exist on any public registry. The line clicked twice. There was no ringing. "State your authorization code," a deep, gravelly voice demanded. "Echo. Sierra. Vanguard. 9. 2. Alpha," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the subterranean room. "I am requesting an immediate secure line to Deputy Director Elias Thorne." There was a brief pause, a digital hum, as the voice recognition software verified my cadence and pitch. Then a sharp click. "I was wondering how long it would take for you to call me." "Nia," Elias said. His voice was calm, but carried the underlying tension of a man who spent his life monitoring global threats. I saw the circus exploding on social media. Your sister-in-law is quite the actress. The Pentagon is currently fielding calls from panicked defense contractors demanding to know if your security clearance is compromised. My clearance is active, Elias, I stated flatly, and my psychological fitness is perfectly intact. What you are witnessing on social media is a synchronized smear campaign designed to distract from a massive financial vulnerability. My brother is underwater to a syndicate of unlicensed lenders to the tune of $5 million. He is trying to hijack my family trust to pay his ransom. But Marcus is an idiot. He does not have the strategic capacity to secure an ex parte asset freeze in federal court within 72 hours. Elias let out a low whistle. An ex parte asset freeze on a combat veteran with top-secret clearance. That requires a judge with serious authority and a total disregard for standard judicial oversight. Exactly, I said, leaning closer to the monitors. Judge Sterling signed the order. He bypassed every medical protocol, ignored the lack of psychiatric evidence, and handed the keys to my entire life over to a man who is actively being hunted by loan sharks. A federal judge does not stick his neck out that far just to do a favor for his old country club buddy. Sterling is compromised. He is motivated by something far more powerful than my father's friendship. He is motivated by leverage, or he is motivated by money. I heard the rapid clacking of a mechanical keyboard on Elias's end of the line. You are asking me to deploy federal resources to investigate a sitting United States judge over a family dispute, Nia. You know the protocols. If I authorize a deep dive on Sterling without a formal warrant, I am crossing a massive line. If he is clean and he catches us snooping around his digital architecture, we both lose our careers. I am not asking for a favor, Elias, I reminded him, my tone dropping to a quiet, dangerous register. 3 years ago, when that cyber terror cell compromised the naval fleet coordinates in the Pacific, I was the one who found the back door. I wrote the patch that saved your entire division from a congressional hearing and a court-martial. I did not ask for a medal then. I am asking for my payment now. I need the full weight of your intelligence apparatus. I need you to unleash the hounds. The typing on his end stopped. The silence stretched between us thick with the weight of mutual respect and shared combat history. Elias and I had survived situations far more lethal than a domestic legal dispute. He knew I never exaggerated a threat, and he knew I never asked for help unless the target was critical. What are the operational parameters? Elias finally asked, his tone shifting from hesitant bureaucrat back to tactical commander. I pulled up a blank digital dossier on my screen. I want a complete financial forensic sweep on Judge Sterling. I want every bank account, every offshore holding, every real estate transaction, and every shell company associated with his name, his wife's name, and his extended associates for the past 10 years. Track the digital footprint of his assets. Look for anomalies. Look for shell corporations registered in tax havens. If the man buys a cup of coffee in Georgetown, I want to know what account paid for the beans. Done, Elias confirmed. What about the brother and the sister-in-law? Marcus is a leaky faucet, I said dismissively. He is panicked, which makes him sloppy. Pull his communication records. Track the IP addresses of the people threatening him for the $5 million. But focus your primary algorithms on Chloe. Look into her maiden name. Look at the LLCs she uses to funnel her social media sponsorships. She is too confident for someone who is supposedly terrified of her husband's violent creditors. She has an exit strategy, Elias. And I guarantee it is funded by dirty money. I am initiating the sweep now, Elias said. I am running it through the decentralized dark web servers. It will take time to bypass the federal firewalls around Sterling's judicial accounts without tripping the alarms. I will have to mask the probes as routine security audits. Give me 24 hours. I do not have 24 hours, Elias. Sterling froze my personal assets. He ordered a mandatory psychiatric hold. If I do not dismantle his authority by tomorrow morning, I will be legally declared incompetent, and Marcus will wire $15 million to violent criminals. I need actionable intelligence, and I need it tonight. I heard Elias exhale sharply. I will put my best analysts on it. We will run a brute force algorithm on their financial architecture. Keep your secure line open. When I find the crack in their armor, I will send the data packets directly to your SCIF terminal. Thank you, Elias. Do not thank me yet, Captain, he warned. If Sterling is as dirty as you think he is, we are not just stepping into a family feud. We are stepping into a federal crime ring. You better be ready to pull the trigger when I hand you the gun. The line went dead. I placed the heavy handset back onto the receiver. I stood alone in the fortified bunker beneath the city, surrounded by the glowing screens of my command center. My family had dragged me into the mud, expecting me to fight like a civilian. They expected tears, panic, and desperate negotiations. Instead, I had just locked target coordinates on their entire existence, utilizing a network of intelligence operatives capable of toppling foreign governments. The waiting game had begun, but I was not afraid. I was simply preparing for the absolute destruction of everything they held dear. The waiting game lasted exactly 4 hours and 12 minutes. I spent that time pacing the length of my subterranean command center, analyzing the real-time metrics of the social media firestorm Chloe had ignited above ground. The digital mob was still surging, demanding my head on a silver platter, completely oblivious to the fact that I was already leagues ahead of them in a much darker, much more lethal game. At exactly 2:14 in the morning, the primary encrypted monitor flashed with a brilliant blinding white notification. A secure data packet had breached my firewall, heavily encrypted and bearing the digital watermark of the Department of Defense. Elias had delivered. I sat down at the console and initiated the decryption sequence, watching as rows of classified financial data surveillance logs and federal wiretap transcripts cascaded across my screens. It was a digital goldmine, a labyrinth of illicit transactions spanning 3 continents and dozens of offshore tax havens. But I did not need to decipher the entire global network. I only needed to find the specific thread connecting a corrupt Washington judge to an opportunistic social media influencer. I ran a targeted macro algorithm cross-referencing Judge Sterling's judicial identification number with the IP addresses Elias had pulled from Chloe's devices. I was looking for the intersection, the exact point where their financial architectures collided. The servers hummed, processing millions of data points per second. I watched the progress bar inch forward, my heart beating in a steady, disciplined rhythm. In intelligence work, the truth is rarely hiding in plain sight. It is buried beneath layers of legal misdirection and corporate shell games. The algorithm chimed. A match. I opened the file, my eyes darting across the highly classified Federal Bureau of Investigation preliminary report. Elias had not just found a discrepancy. He had handed me the keys to an active top-secret federal probe. Judge Sterling was not just a corrupt magistrate who took bribes on the golf course. He was the primary subject of a massive multi-agency investigation into international money laundering. According to the FBI surveillance logs, Sterling had been systematically utilizing his position on the bench to funnel illicit cartel funds through a sophisticated network of seemingly legitimate domestic businesses. He would approve inflated bankruptcy settlements, manipulate corporate restructurings, and authorize the liquidation of massive estates, skimming millions off the top. But a federal judge cannot simply deposit cartel cash into his personal checking account without triggering federal oversight. He needed a washing machine. He needed a clean, untraceable mechanism to legitimize the funds and move them offshore. I scrolled down to the corporate registry documents Elias had extracted from a secure server in the Cayman Islands. Sterling had set up a complex web of LLCs, all categorized under wellness brands, digital marketing firms, and public relations consultancies. These shell companies were designed to receive massive injections of dirty money, claiming the funds were legitimate revenue from anonymous foreign sponsors and luxury brand partnerships. I narrowed the search parameters, focusing specifically on the primary shell corporation responsible for moving the bulk of Sterling's laundered cash. The company was registered under the name Aura Elite Digital Management. I pulled the incorporation documents, tracing the digital signatures back to the original filing date, which aligned perfectly with the timeline of Chloe's sudden inexplicable rise to social media fame 2 years ago. I held my breath as I opened the final page of the incorporation dossier. There, printed in stark black and white, was the name of the Chief Executive Officer and sole proprietary owner of Aura Elite Digital Management, Chloe Jackson. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical strike. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the name on the screen as the horrific, brilliant reality of the situation washed over me. Chloe was not just a vapid influencer who married my brother for his money. She was the primary launderer for a corrupt federal judge tied to an international syndicate. Her entire lifestyle brand, the millions of followers, the lucrative sponsorships, it was all a meticulously crafted front. The massive influx of wealth she flaunted on social media was not from selling dietary supplements or organic baby clothes. It was cartel money, washed clean through her fake digital management firm and deposited directly into Sterling's offshore accounts, with Chloe undoubtedly taking a massive untaxed percentage for her services. It was a symbiotic relationship built on immense greed. Sterling needed a clean public-facing entity with a justifiable reason to receive millions in anonymous corporate sponsorships. Chloe needed the wealth and status she felt she deserved without actually working for it. They had found each other, likely introduced through my father's country club connections, and forged a highly illegal alliance. But Chloe had a fatal flaw. She was married to Marcus, a man who possessed all of the arrogance of the elite class, but none of the intelligence. When Marcus lost $3 million of the family trust and desperately turned to violent underground lenders for a $5 million bailout, he unwittingly put Chloe's entire laundering operation in the crosshairs of ruthless criminals. The loan sharks were threatening her perfect life, and drawing dangerous attention to her finances. Chloe could not ask Sterling for the $5 million to pay off her husband's debts. The FBI was already circling them. Moving that much cash domestically would instantly trigger an indictment. She was trapped. She needed clean, legitimate domestic money to pay off the loan sharks and secure her safety before the syndicate burned her life to the ground. And I was sitting on a clean, legitimate $15 million trust. The puzzle was finally complete. The Thanksgiving dinner ambush, the fake tears, the claims of my severe mental instability, it had absolutely nothing to do with Marcus and his bruised ego. It was a desperate, calculated strike by Chloe to hijack my trust fund, liquidate the assets, and pay off the violent creditors before they exposed her entire criminal empire. And Judge Sterling had eagerly signed the ex parte asset freeze and the restraining order because Chloe's survival was directly tied to his own. If she went down for the loan shark debts, she would inevitably drag him down for the money laundering. They had weaponized the justice system to silence me, protect their syndicate, and steal my family's legacy to cover their tracks. I let out a low, dark laugh that echoed off the concrete walls of the bunker. They thought they had backed a traumatized veteran into a corner. They had no idea they had just handed a former naval intelligence officer the exact coordinates to drop a nuclear warhead on their entire existence. I did not feel anger anymore. Anger is an undisciplined emotion, a vulnerability that clouds tactical judgment. What I felt was absolute chilling clarity. My family had sold their souls, and Chloe and Sterling had built their empire on a foundation of gasoline. I just needed to strike the match. I opened a secure communication channel, bypassing Elias and connecting directly to a private, highly classified server maintained by the lead prosecuting attorney for the Department of Justice's Financial Crimes Division. It was a contact I had cultivated during my days at the Pentagon, a man who built his entire career on tearing down corrupt government officials. I attached the encrypted dossier Elias had provided, highlighting the indisputable connection between Judge Sterling's Cayman Island accounts and Chloe Jackson's domestic shell corporation. I did not write a lengthy explanation. In my line of work, the evidence does the talking. I simply typed a single direct message. I have the architect of the Aura Elite Laundering Syndicate. She is actively attempting to defraud a $15 million domestic trust to cover syndicate debts. I am scheduled to appear in Judge Sterling's court within 48 hours. I will deliver them both to you on a silver platter. Have your tactical teams ready to breach. I hit send, watching the progress bar complete the transmission. The trap was set. Marcus, Chloe, my parents, and their corrupt judge thought they were marching me to my execution. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that they were walking directly into a federal ambush, and I was going to be the one holding the detonator. I stepped out of the bunker and took the elevator back up to my executive suite. The Department of Justice was preparing their tactical teams for the courtroom, but I was not about to let Marcus and Chloe enjoy a peaceful 48 hours before the federal hammer dropped. In psychological warfare, you do not just defeat the enemy alliance. You inject poison into their ranks and watch them tear each other to shreds from the inside out. I needed Marcus to walk into that courtroom completely unhinged, terrified not of me, but of the woman sitting right next to him. I sat down at my desk and pulled up a blank legal template. I was going to draft a piece of bait so irresistible, so terrifyingly plausible, that my brother would swallow it whole. Marcus was a man drowning in a $5 million debt to violent criminals. His only lifeline was the $15 million trust. Chloe had convinced him that seizing the trust was a joint survival strategy. I needed to show him that he was not a partner in her scheme. He was the scapegoat. Using the highly classified financial data Elias had provided, I extracted the exact routing numbers for Chloe's offshore shell company, Aura Elite Digital Management. I drafted a flawless, highly sophisticated automated wire transfer mandate. It was formatted exactly like the documents used by elite wealth management firms in the district. The mandate explicitly outlined that the very second Judge Sterling signed the final conservatorship order, the entire $15 million balance of the Jackson Family Trust would automatically bypass the domestic holding accounts. Instead, it would be instantly routed into a numbered Swiss bank account, under Chloe's sole proprietary control. To make the trap absolutely inescapable, I forged a secondary document. It was a printed email chain between Chloe and a high-end international travel concierge. The emails detailed the booking of a one-way first-class ticket to Geneva, Switzerland, scheduled to depart exactly 4 hours after our upcoming court hearing. It also included a request for long-term luxury estate rentals in the Swiss Alps, specifically noting that she would be traveling alone with her 2 children. It was a masterpiece of financial fiction grounded in just enough truth to be devastating. The routing numbers were real. The shell company was real. The threat to Marcus' life was incredibly real. When he looked at these papers, he would not see a forgery. He would see his wife stealing the ransom money, packing up his children, and fleeing to Europe, leaving him behind to be slaughtered by the Miami loan sharks. I printed the documents on heavy cream-colored legal paper to give them the distinct, undeniable weight of authenticity. I placed them inside a standard unmarked manila envelope and sealed it tight. Because of Judge Sterling's ridiculous restraining order, I could not send the package myself, nor could I use anyone directly affiliated with my legal team. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Sarah walked in immediately, her expression sharp and ready for instruction. I slid the envelope across the mahogany wood. "Hire an independent, untraceable courier," I commanded. "Pay them in cash. Have this delivered directly to Marcus Jackson's personal desk at his investment bank. Label it as an accidental misdirection from Judge Sterling's private chambers. Mark it highly confidential." Sarah did not ask a single question. She simply nodded, took the envelope, and vanished. I turned back to my monitors, pulling up the GPS tracking microchip I had discreetly slipped inside the cardboard flap of the envelope. I watched the tiny green dot navigate the busy grid of the Washington streets. It moved steadily toward the financial district, cutting through traffic with lethal precision. I leaned back in my chair, steepled my fingers, and allowed myself a cold, predatory smile. I could visualize exactly what was about to happen in that pristine banking office. Marcus was likely sitting at his desk right now, sweating through his expensive shirt, jumping at every shadow and terrified of every unlisted phone call. He was a man running out of time, clinging to the desperate hope that his wife was going to save him. Then a courier would drop a sealed envelope on his desk. He would see the seal of the judge's chambers. He would tear it open expecting good news about the asset freeze. Instead, he would read his own death warrant. He would see the routing numbers. He would see the Swiss accounts. He would see the one-way ticket to Geneva. The realization would hit him with the force of a freight train. He would realize that Chloe never had any intention of paying his $5 million debt. She had used his vulnerability, manipulated his parents, and orchestrated the entire smear campaign against me just to get her hands on the vault. She was going to take the $15 million, take his sons, and vanish across international borders, leaving him completely exposed to the violent men who were threatening to break his legs. The paranoia would consume him instantly. He could not call the police because he was tied to illegal gambling debts. He could not confront me because of the restraining order. He could not complain to my parents because they would never believe their flawless daughter-in-law was capable of such a betrayal. His only option was to confront Chloe. He would go home tonight and look at the woman he married, the mother of his children, and he would see a predator who was actively plotting to leave him for dead. The perfect photogenic marriage my mother prized above all else was about to become a war zone. They would smile for the cameras, but behind closed doors, they would be tearing each other to pieces. Marcus would be watching her every move, waiting for her to betray him, while Chloe would be completely oblivious to the fact that her husband suddenly viewed her as his executioner. The bait was in the water. The trap was armed. All I had to do now was wait for the venom to take effect and watch them bleed out before they even stepped foot inside the courthouse. The green dot on my tracking software blinked once before coming to a complete stop at the exact coordinates of Marcus' investment firm. I watched the screen with cold satisfaction. The courier had made the drop. Now the poison would do its work. Across town, inside a glass-walled office overlooking the financial district, Marcus was already unraveling. He sat at his mahogany desk, his tie completely discarded, staring blankly at his computer monitor. His phone buzzed endlessly with blocked numbers. The loan sharks were reminding him that his time was rapidly evaporating. When the untraceable courier dropped the heavy manila envelope onto his desk, Marcus nearly jumped out of his expensive leather chair. He saw the fake judicial seal I had meticulously printed on the front. He tore it open with shaking hands, desperate for a lifeline. He expected an official confirmation of the asset freeze. He expected a guarantee that the $15 million was finally his. Instead, he pulled out the Swiss bank routing documents. Marcus stared at the papers, his blood turning entirely to ice. He read the account details. He saw Chloe's name listed as the sole beneficiary of the offshore vault. He flipped to the next page and saw the travel itinerary. A one-way first-class ticket to Geneva. Luxury chalet rentals in the Alps. 2 children listed on the manifest. 0 husbands. The air rushed out of his lungs. The pristine walls of his office suddenly felt like a shrinking cage. Every single detail I had planted hit his deepest, most primal fears. He remembered how aggressively Chloe had pushed for the conservatorship. He remembered how quickly she had suggested cutting me out completely. She had framed it as a desperate move to save their family from his massive debt. But looking at these documents, a horrifying new reality crashed down on him. She was never going to pay the $5 million to the men threatening to break his legs. She was going to seize the entire $15 million, transfer it to a jurisdiction that ignored American subpoenas, and leave him to face the syndicate's wrath entirely alone. Marcus crushed the papers in his fist. He could not scream. He could not smash his keyboard. He was trapped in a glass office surrounded by colleagues who still believed he was a financial genius. He shoved the crumpled documents into his briefcase, grabbed his coat, and practically ran to the private elevator. When Marcus unlocked the front door of his immaculate suburban home, the silence felt deeply sinister. He walked toward the living room and found Chloe. She was sitting perfectly positioned by the large bay windows, adjusting a ring light. She was dressed in a conservative beige dress, rehearsing her victim narrative for the upcoming court appearance. She looked up and offered him a flawless, manufactured smile. "You are home early, darling," Chloe said, her voice light and musical. "I was just practicing what I'm going to say to the judge tomorrow. We need to make sure we sound completely unified. We have to show everyone how much trauma Nia has caused our family." Marcus stood in the doorway, his briefcase feeling like a block of lead in his hand. He looked at the woman he had married. He looked at the blonde extensions, the expensive jewelry, the serene smile. For the first time in his entire life, the golden child saw the absolute rot hiding beneath the gold. Unified. Marcus repeated, his voice barely a whisper. His heart hammered against his ribs. Yes, Chloe, we are completely unified. Where are you planning to go after we win the case? Chloe blinked, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. A tiny, nearly invisible crack in her perfect facade. What do you mean, Marcus? We are going to pay off those horrible men. Then we are going to fix the family foundation. We will finally have peace. Marcus took a slow step forward. He wanted to rip the briefcase open. He wanted to throw the Swiss bank routing numbers in her face and demand to know why she bought a one-way ticket to Geneva. But the survival instinct finally kicked in. If he confronted her now, she would deny everything. She might panic and flee before the court hearing even started. If she left now, he would not get the trust fund and the loan sharks would end his life. He needed her to play the victim in front of Judge Sterling. He needed her tears to secure the $15 million. He had to play along until the money hit his domestic account. Once the funds cleared, he would freeze her out before she could execute her offshore transfer. Nowhere special, Chloe added smoothly, turning off her ring light and walking over to smooth the lapels of his jacket. Just a quiet weekend away for the four of us. You, me, and the boys. We deserve a fresh start. Marcus looked down into her eyes. He felt physically sick. She was lying to him without a single hesitation. The depth of her betrayal was staggering, but he forced himself to smile back. He wrapped his arms around her, hugging the woman he now knew was actively plotting his demise. A fresh start, he agreed, his tone hollow. That sounds perfect. That night, neither of them slept. They lay in their massive king-sized beds, staring at the ceiling, sharing the same space while existing in entirely different dimensions of deceit. Chloe was silently calculating how fast she could liquidate the trust and board her flight to Europe. Marcus was gripping the edge of the mattress, mentally mapping out how to intercept the wire transfer and lock his wife out of the banking portals the moment they left the courthouse. They were two starving wolves locked in a cage, waiting for the exact right moment to tear each other's throats out. The morning of the hearing arrived with a heavy, oppressive downpour. The Washington rain lashed against the windows of their black luxury SUV as they rode to the district courthouse in complete silence. The tension inside the vehicle was thick enough to choke on. Marcus kept checking his phone, jumping at every notification, terrified it was a final warning from his violent creditors. Chloe sat perfectly straight, holding a tissue, periodically checking her reflection in her compact mirror to ensure her makeup looked appropriately distressed. They pulled up to the imposing marble steps of the courthouse. The press had gathered outside, tipped off by Chloe's viral social media campaign. Cameras flashed as the doors opened. Marcus stepped out first. He reached back and offered his hand to his wife. Chloe took it delicately. She leaned against his shoulder, letting out a small, strategic sob for the cameras. Marcus wrapped his arm protectively around her waist, glaring at the reporters as a devoted, protective husband should. They walked up the courthouse steps together, a flawless portrait of marital solidarity. They looked like the perfect victims. They looked like a united front ready to defeat a hostile, unstable veteran. But beneath the tailored suits and the designer dresses, they were actively bleeding each other dry. The poison I had slipped into their ranks had done its job flawlessly. They were walking into Judge Sterling's courtroom, entirely focused on destroying one another. They had no idea I was waiting inside, ready to drop a federal anvil on both of their heads. The heavy bronze and gold of my Navy cross lay perfectly still against the polished mahogany table. The sharp metallic clink had faded, leaving behind a suffocating silence in the courtroom. Judge Sterling leaned back in his high leather chair, a deeply satisfied gleam in his eyes. He fully believed he had just stripped a decorated military officer of her armor. He believed he had established absolute dominance in his courtroom. Chloe lowered her lace handkerchief just enough to let a small, triumphant sigh escape her lips. Her lawyer, a slick and predatory man named Caldwell, immediately seized the momentum. He smoothed the front of his expensive suit, stepped out from behind the plaintiff's table, and walked confidently toward the center of the room. "Your Honor!" Caldwell began, his voice booming with theatrical gravity. "Now that the courtroom has been secured from the defendant's aggressive and intimidating displays, we must turn our attention to the tragic reality of this case. We are not here to punish Miss Jackson. We are here to protect her from herself, and to protect the Jackson family legacy from her rapid psychological decline." Caldwell walked back to his table and picked up a thick, securely bound medical folder. He held it up for the judge and the gallery to see. "I hold in my hands an independent psychiatric evaluation," Caldwell announced, his tone dripping with manufactured sorrow. This evaluation was compiled by a leading behavioral specialist who reviewed Miss Jackson's recent erratic behavior, her aggressive outbursts, and her documented history in active combat zones. "The findings are deeply disturbing. The medical professional concluded that the defendant is suffering from severe, untreated post-traumatic stress disorder, coupled with acute paranoid delusions and hypervigilance." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded loosely in my lap. I did not blink. I did not object. I simply watched Caldwell weave a masterful, entirely fabricated narrative. I knew exactly what that folder contained. It contained forged medical opinions bought and paid for by the very same illicit funds Chloe had been washing for Judge Sterling. They had essentially purchased a fake diagnosis to legally brand me insane. Caldwell paced slowly in front of the bench, making sure every reporter and spectator in the gallery hung on his every word. "According to this evaluation, Miss Jackson views her own family members as enemy combatants." He continued, pointing a sorrowful finger toward Marcus and Chloe. "She suffers from a complete inability to regulate her emotions. She is hostile, unpredictable, and entirely unfit to manage a complex $15 million financial trust. Leaving that level of wealth in the hands of a woman actively battling severe paranoid delusions is not just irresponsible, Your Honor, it is highly dangerous." I slowly shifted my gaze away from the lawyer and looked past the wooden railing, scanning the second row of the spectator gallery. I found my parents. They were sitting side by side, dressed in immaculate, conservative courtroom attire. My mother, Vivian, wore a tailored charcoal gray suit with a single strand of pearls around her neck. She looked like the absolute picture of a grieving, concerned matriarch. But when my eyes locked onto hers, I saw nothing but pure, unadulterated ice. There was no sorrow in her expression. There was no maternal conflict. She sat with her spine perfectly straight, giving small, solemn nods of agreement as Caldwell read the horrific, fabricated lies about my mental health. She was actively watching my character be assassinated in a federal building, and she was endorsing every single word of it. Beside her, my father, Harold, proved once again to be a spectacular coward. He refused to look at me. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the seal of the court mounted behind the judge. He was the patriarch who had built his reputation on integrity and logic, yet he was sitting in absolute silence while a hired lawyer told the world his daughter was a broken, dangerous lunatic. They had traded my sanity for their social survival. They had sold my freedom to protect Marcus. I moved my eyes back to the plaintiff's table. Marcus was completely ignoring his lawyer's dramatic performance. He was physically vibrating with a terrified electric energy. He sat hunched over the table, his knuckles white as he gripped his leather briefcase. Inside that briefcase were the forged Swiss bank routing documents I had planted on his desk the day before. The poison was actively destroying his nervous system. He kept darting furious, paranoid glances at Chloe. He did not care about the $15 million trust anymore. He only cared about intercepting the money before his wife could board her imaginary flight to Geneva. He was a man seconds away from total systemic failure. Chloe, however, was playing her part beautifully. She sat slightly behind Marcus, shrinking into her chair to appear as small and fragile as possible. She kept her eyes wide and fearful, occasionally looking at me, and then quickly darting her gaze away, acting as though my mere presence in the room terrified her. She was waiting for the final gavel strike. She was waiting for Judge Sterling to hand over the vault so she could pay off the syndicate and secure her own survival. Judge Sterling extended his hand. "Bailiff, please bring me that evaluation," he said, his voice heavy with performative judicial concern. The bailiff took the thick folder from Caldwell and handed it up to the bench. Sterling put on his gold-rimmed reading glasses and slowly flipped through the pages. He took his time, putting on an excellent show for the court record. He frowned deeply, shaking his head as he read the fabricated clinical notes. He was acting like a benevolent patriarch burdened with a terrible necessary duty. "This is incredibly difficult to read," Judge Sterling finally said, taking off his glasses and looking down at me with profound, patronizing pity. "Miss Jackson, your service to this country is commendable. But the court cannot ignore the overwhelming medical evidence presented here today. Your family loves you. They have brought this petition forward out of deep concern for your well-being. The level of paranoia and hostility described in these medical files makes it abundantly clear that you are currently incapable of executing your fiduciary duties." Sterling picked up his heavy silver pen. He moved it toward the final order of conservatorship resting on his desk. All he had to do was sign his name and the $15 million would be instantly transferred to Marcus. "The court finds that it is in the best interest of the estate and in the best interest of your own personal safety to grant full permanent administrative control of the Jackson Family Trust to your brother Marcus Jackson." Sterling announced, his pen hovering just millimeters above the signature line. "Furthermore, the court orders that you submit to a mandatory state-sponsored psychiatric facility for a minimum observation period of 30 days. A quiet, collective gasp rippled through the courtroom gallery. 30 days in a locked psychiatric ward. They were not just taking my money. They were taking my freedom. They were locking me in a padded room to ensure I could not interfere while they looted the accounts and paid off their illicit debts. My mother let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief from the gallery. Chloe buried her face in her hands, pretending to weep with gratitude. Marcus leaned entirely forward, staring at the judge's pen like a starving man looking at water. Judge Sterling looked down at me one last time. He expected me to scream. He expected me to break protocol, to shout objections, to give him the exact hostile reaction he needed to justify his ruling to the court record. "Miss Jackson," Sterling said, his voice echoing in the silent room, "do you have any final statement before I sign this order and remand you to medical custody?" I sat in my chair for 3 seconds of absolute, terrifying silence. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at Marcus or Chloe. I kept my eyes locked directly on the corrupt man sitting behind the elevated mahogany bench. I placed my hands flat on the defense table and slowly stood up. I smoothed the front of my black silk suit. I looked at the heavy bronze navy cross, resting abandoned on the wood, and then I raised my chin. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through the sterile air like a razor blade. "I have a final statement, but I will not be addressing my mental health today. I will be addressing yours." Judge Sterling brought his heavy wooden gavel down with a deafening crack. The sound echoed off the high marble walls of the courtroom, sharp and violent. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He leaned completely over the elevated mahogany bench, pointing a trembling finger directly at me. "You are dangerously close to contempt of court, Miss Jackson," Sterling roared, abandoning his carefully crafted facade of judicial concern. "You will not stand in my courtroom and make threats. You will sit down, remain silent, and accept the medical ruling, or I will have the bailiffs place you in handcuffs immediately." I did not sit down. I did not step back. I stood my ground, my posture radiating the absolute authority of a commanding officer who had just seized control of the battlefield. "I am not making a threat, Your Honor," I replied, my voice carrying cleanly across the vast, echoing room. "I am entering evidence into the official court record. As the current legal administrator of the Jackson Family Trust, I am formally objecting to the appointment of Marcus Jackson as my successor. Under federal financial regulations, a proposed conservator must be demonstrably solvent and free from severe financial liabilities. My brother is neither." Caldwell practically leaped out of his chair at the plaintiff's table. "Objection," he shouted, waving his hands frantically. "This is entirely irrelevant. We are here to discuss the defendant's severe psychiatric decline, not my client's personal finances. She is having a paranoid episode right in front of us. She is attempting to derail the proceedings with wild, unsubstantiated delusions. I did not look at Caldwell. I kept my eyes locked on the judge. Donovan, my lead attorney, stepped forward. He did not ask for permission. He simply reached down to the digital evidence console installed at the defense table and plugged in a secure encrypted drive. Defense Exhibit A. Donovan announced, calmly tapping a sequence of commands into the terminal. Before Sterling could strike his gavel again, the massive digital projectors mounted on the courtroom ceiling hummed to life. Two enormous high-definition screens descended slowly from the walls flanking the judge's bench. The entire gallery gasped. Every reporter in the room suddenly leaned forward, their pens hovering eagerly over their notepads. The screens flashed white for a fraction of a second before resolving into a crystal-clear, highly detailed financial spreadsheet. It was not a chaotic jumble of numbers. It was a perfectly organized, ruthlessly annotated, forensic accounting report. The header of the document was stamped with the official seal of a premier international financial auditing firm. "What you are looking at, Your Honor," I said, projecting my voice so every single person in the gallery could hear me, "is the true reason my family dragged me into this courtroom today. They did not come here to save my mental health. They came here to stage a bank robbery." Marcus let out a strangled, breathless sound. He pushed his chair back, his eyes wide with absolute primal terror, as he stared up at the massive screens. The pristine image of the wealthy, successful investment banker evaporated in an instant. He looked like a man standing on the gallows, watching the executioner pull the lever. I stepped out from behind the defense table. I pointed directly at the first column of the projected spreadsheet. 2 years ago, my brother Marcus convinced our parents to grant him temporary access to a subsidiary investment wing of the family trust. I explained, my tone surgical and precise. He promised to diversify the portfolio. Instead, as the records clearly show, he authorized a completely unregulated wire transfer of $3 million to a fraudulent offshore cryptocurrency syndicate. He bypassed standard risk assessment protocols and lost the entire $3 million principal in less than 72 hours. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the spectator gallery. I did not stop. I pointed to the next column on the screen. When he lost that money, he was terrified of losing his status as the golden child of the Jackson family, so he desperately tried to win it back. 6 months ago, Marcus engaged in a series of highly leveraged, catastrophic short sells. When the market moved against him, traditional financial institutions refused to extend him any further credit. He was entirely locked out of the legitimate banking sector. Caldwell slammed his hand on the table. "Your Honor, I demand these screens be turned off immediately. These documents are unverified. This is a gross violation of my client's privacy. The documents are verified banking records obtained legally during a routine audit of the family foundation." Donovan fired back, his voice overpowering Caldwell's. "The defense has the right to challenge the financial fitness of the petitioner." Judge Sterling looked from the screens to Marcus. He could have ordered the bailiffs to shut down the projectors. He had the authority. But he was trapped. If he shut down the presentation of verified financial evidence in a courtroom packed with journalists, he would instantly flag himself for judicial misconduct. He sat completely frozen, his face pale, watching the presentation continue. "Because my brother could not secure a legitimate loan," I continued, my voice relentless. He turned to the shadow economy. "The document on the screen is a verified ledger from a syndicate of unlicensed underground creditors operating out of Miami. 3 weeks ago, Marcus Jackson borrowed exactly $5 million from these individuals. The interest rates are extortionate, the collection methods are violent, and the deadline for repayment expires in exactly 12 hours. I signaled Donovan. He tapped the console and a new document appeared on the screens. It was a digital copy of a threatening message Marcus had received featuring photographs of his own home and explicit demands for immediate payment. "The medical evaluation submitted by the plaintiff claims I am suffering from severe paranoid delusions because I locked Marcus out of the family trust accounts," I said, staring directly at the hired lawyer who had tried to brand me insane. "It claims my hypervigilance is a symptom of combat trauma." But as you can clearly see, I was not hallucinating an enemy. I was actively barricading the vault against a desperate, heavily indebted gambling addict who was trying to liquidate his parents' life savings to pay off a violent criminal syndicate. I am not paranoid. I am the only responsible fiduciary left in my family. I slowly turned away from the judge and looked past the wooden railing into the gallery. I locked eyes with my parents. Vivian and Harold were sitting frozen on the wooden bench. The transformation in their faces was spectacular and devastating. My mother, who had spent her entire life meticulously crafting the perfect social image, was staring up at the massive screens with her mouth slightly open. Her custom-tailored emerald gown suddenly looked like a tragic costume. The irrefutable proof of her precious son's catastrophic failure was being broadcast in glowing, high-definition letters for every country club rival and society reporter to see. All the lies she had told her friends about Marcus being a financial prodigy were turning to ash right in front of her. She realized in that exact agonizing second that Marcus had not pushed for this conservatorship to protect her. He had pushed for it to steal from her. He had orchestrated my public humiliation, weaponized my military service, and dragged the family name into a federal court, purely to cover up his own pathetic, reckless gambling debts. Harold gripped the wooden pew in front of him so hard his knuckles were stark white. He looked at Marcus, his eyes filled with a mixture of profound shock and absolute crushing disgust. The son he had protected, the son he had allowed to insult and degrade me, was nothing but a parasite. Harold had been willing to commit perjury to help Marcus steal my authority, blindly believing he was securing the family legacy. Now he realized he had been actively helping Marcus hand that entire legacy over to violent loan sharks. Marcus tried to speak. He looked toward the gallery, reaching a trembling hand out toward our parents. "Mom, Dad," he stammered, his voice weak and pathetic. "It is not what it looks like. I can explain. I was going to fix it." Vivian did not offer him a single word of comfort. She did not rush forward to protect him the way she had protected Chloe the night before. She shrank back into the wooden bench, her eyes wide with horror, looking at her golden child as if he were a complete stranger. The illusion was dead. The perfect son was a fraud, and the daughter they had discarded was the only thing standing between them and total financial ruin. I turned my back on my parents and looked at Chloe. She had dropped her lace handkerchief entirely. The fake tears were gone. She was staring at the screens, her jaw tight, realizing that her husband's financial incompetence had just been exposed to the entire world. But she still thought she was safe. She still thought her own dirty secrets were hidden in the dark. She did not know that Marcus was just the opening act, and the real execution was about to begin. I turned away from the plaintiff's table and walked slowly back to my own. My eyes never left the elevated mahogany bench. Judge Sterling was sweating now. The confident, patronizing patriarch who had rubber-stamped a fraudulent asset freeze was gripping his gavel so tightly his knuckles mirrored my father's. He knew the narrative had completely slipped from his control, but he still believed his black robe made him untouchable. I reached down and picked up the heavy bronze Navy Cross from the table. I held it up so the harsh courtroom lighting caught the metallic edges. "You ordered me to remove this medal at the beginning of this hearing, Your Honor," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the vast room. "You claimed it was an aggressive display of military authority. You claimed it was psychologically terrorizing my fragile sister-in-law, but we both know that was a lie." Sterling slammed his gavel. "Miss Jackson, I am warning you for the absolute last time. You have made your point regarding your brother's finances. This court will not tolerate further theatrics. You will step down immediately." I stepped forward instead. I held the medal higher. I was awarded this Navy Cross by the President of the United States. I continued easily projecting my voice over his frantic gavel strikes. But it was not awarded for standard combat deployment. It was awarded for a highly classified naval intelligence operation. 2 years ago, I led a specialized cyber task force that tracked, infiltrated, and entirely dismantled a massive international money laundering syndicate operating out of the Cayman Islands. The gavel froze in the air. Judge Sterling's face turned the color of wet ash. The blustering authority drained from his body in an instant, leaving behind a terrified old man trapped behind a wooden desk. My task force traced billions of dollars in illicit cartel funds being washed through domestic shell companies. I said, my eyes locking onto his with predatory precision. We tracked the digital footprints of corrupt politicians, dirty corporate executives, and federal magistrates who were using their positions of absolute power to facilitate international financial crimes. We seized the servers, we decrypted the ledgers, and we handed those ledgers directly to the Department of Justice. A lethal silence fell over the courtroom. The reporters in the gallery stopped breathing. Caldwell Chloe's expensive lawyer slowly backed away from his own table, suddenly realizing he was standing in the blast radius of a federal explosion. "You did not ask me to remove this medal because it intimidated Chloe," I stated softly, letting the undeniable truth hang in the air. "You asked me to remove it because you recognized exactly what it represented. You recognized it because the very same cartel accounts my unit flagged in the Caymans are directly linked to the offshore shell corporations you currently use to hide your bribes." "This is an outrage!" Sterling sputtered, his voice cracking into a panicked, high-pitched wheeze. "Bailiff, arrest this woman. Clear the gallery. I am holding this entire courtroom in contempt." The bailiffs shifted uneasily, looking at each other, but neither of them took a single step toward me. The authority of the bench had completely evaporated. "You thought you could sign a blind asset freeze and declare me legally insane before I could deploy the intelligence I gathered," I said, stepping right up to the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the bench. "You thought using my greedy, indebted brother as a smokescreen would keep the federal auditors away from your own dirty money. But you were sloppy, Your Honor. When you tried to bury a highly decorated intelligence officer, you forgot to check if she was already investigating you." Before Judge Sterling could utter another desperate threat, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom violently swung open. The crash of solid wood hitting the marble walls sounded like a bomb detonating. A dozen armed federal agents flooded the center aisle. They moved with absolute synchronized military precision, their tactical vests clearly displaying the letters FBI in stark yellow print. "This courtroom is now under federal jurisdiction," a tall, sharp-eyed agent announced, his voice slicing through the immediate chaos. He marched directly past the spectator gallery, bypassing my completely paralyzed parents, and stepped right up to the wooden railing. Sterling dropped his gavel. His hands shook so violently that he knocked over his water glass, spilling it across his pristine judicial bench. "You have no authority here," Sterling stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, breathless squeak. "This is a civil proceeding. I am a sitting federal judge." "Not anymore," the lead agent replied coldly, pulling a thick stack of warrants from his tactical vest. "Judge Robert Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, international money laundering, and racketeering." Two agents bypassed the legal tables, marched straight up the steps to the bench, and physically hauled the judge out of his high leather chair. The corrupt magistrate who had tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward just 10 minutes ago was now being forcibly restrained, his wrists yanked behind his back and locked into heavy steel handcuffs. Down at the plaintiff's table, the illusion completely shattered. Chloe scrambled out of her chair, her mask of fragile innocence entirely gone. She backed away from the advancing federal agents, holding her hands up in frantic, ugly denial. "There has been a massive mistake," Chloe shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "I am just a mother. I am the victim here. My husband is the one with the gambling debts. Look at Marcus. Arrest Marcus." She threw her own husband to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. Marcus stared at her, his face completely bloodless, finally realizing that the woman he married was a vicious predator who had actively planned to leave him to die. The lead agent did not even look at Marcus. He locked his eyes directly on my sister-in-law. "Chloe Jackson," the agent said, his voice echoing loudly for the entire gallery and every frantically typing reporter to hear. "You are under arrest for your role as the Chief Executive Officer of Aura Elite Digital Management. You are being charged with federal tax evasion, operating an unlicensed money-transmitting business and laundering cartel assets through offshore shell corporations. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream as a female agent grabbed her arms, spinning her around to secure the handcuffs. She kicked, she thrashed, and she cursed, completely abandoning her polished lifestyle guru persona, revealing the feral, cornered criminal hiding underneath. I stood quietly at the defense table, my Navy Cross resting safely beside me, watching the federal agents dismantle the corrupt empire that had tried to bury me. The civil trial was officially dead. The federal prosecution had begun. Chloe fought the federal agents with the desperate, wild energy of a trapped animal. The steel handcuffs clicked sharply around her wrists, locking her arms behind her back. Realizing she could not physically escape, she turned her absolute, unfiltered rage entirely onto her husband. "You stupid, pathetic loser!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as she spat the words at Marcus across the chaotic courtroom. "This is all your fault. If you had not gambled away millions of dollars like an absolute moron, the feds would never have looked twice at my accounts. I was going to leave you to rot. I had the ticket to Geneva booked. You are nothing but a weak, pathetic liability, and I hope those loan sharks tear you to pieces." Marcus physically recoiled as if she had shot him in the chest. The pristine, arrogant investment banker was completely gone. He stood trembling at the plaintiff's table, his face devoid of all color, staring at the woman who had just confessed to orchestrating his execution. He finally understood the magnificent depth of his own ruin. His wife was a federal criminal bound for federal prison. The $15 million trust fund was completely out of his reach. He was absolutely broke, publicly humiliated, and still owed $5 million to a violent Miami syndicate that would be actively looking for him the moment he stepped out of the courthouse. He had traded his loyal sister for a parasite, and now he had absolutely nothing left to protect him. Up at the bench, the spectacle of justice was swift and unforgiving. Two agents hauled Judge Sterling down the wooden steps. The heavy black robes that had once been his absolute shield now looked like a heavy shroud. He dragged his feet, his face buried in his chest to avoid the flashing cameras of the press gallery. The wooden gavel he had used to try and break me sat abandoned on the mahogany desk, a useless piece of wood stripped of all its corrupt authority. He was not a god in this courtroom anymore. He was just another criminal being marched to a federal transport van. The spectator gallery was an absolute uproar. Journalists were shouting into their phones, live streaming the historic downfall of a federal magistrate and a high-profile socialite. The noise was deafening, a chaotic symphony of flashing cameras, shouting agents, and Chloe's continuous venomous screaming as they dragged her down the center aisle. Marcus collapsed into his chair, putting his head in his hands. He was a dead man, walking stripped of his golden child status, his marriage, and his future. He had tried to steal my life, and in doing so, he had completely engineered his own destruction. The chaotic din of the courtroom began to recede as the federal agents cleared the center aisle, leaving the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind them. I remained standing at the defense table, methodically organizing my legal documents. The storm had passed, leaving behind nothing but the absolute wreckage of the Jackson family. A sudden, frantic movement caught my attention. Vivian pushed past the wooden railing, her custom emerald gown looking wrinkled and entirely out of place in the aftermath of a federal raid. She practically sprinted toward me, completely ignoring her devastated son, who was still slumped at the plaintiff's table. Harold followed close behind her, his shoulders hunched, the proud retired surgeon reduced to a shuffling, terrified old man. "Nia, my brilliant daughter, please," Vivian gasped. She reached out and grabbed my forearm with trembling, perfectly manicured hands. "You have to listen to me. We did not know. I swear to you on my life, we had absolutely no idea Chloe was a criminal. You have to save us. You have to save your brother." I looked down at her hands clutching my black silk suit. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers until the sheer freezing weight of my gaze forced her to let go. She shrank back, her eyes wide with a desperate, calculating panic. "You did not know she was laundering cartel money," I stated, my voice devoid of any warmth. "But you knew Marcus lost $3 million. You knew he borrowed $5 million from violent loan sharks. You knew you were actively lying under oath about my mental health. You knew exactly what you were doing, Mother. You just thought you were going to get away with it. Harold stepped forward, attempting to summon a fractured shred of patriarchal authority. Nia, this is not the time for assigning blame. He pleaded, his voice cracking. Marcus is going to be killed. His investment bank will fire him by the end of the hour. The syndicate will come for our estate, our assets, everything we have built in this city. We are your family. We are your blood. I am deeply sorry we ever doubted your strength, but you have the $15 million trust securely in your name. You must wire the funds and clear his debt before it is too late. Marcus finally lifted his heavy head from his hands. He stumbled over to where our parents stood, looking at me with hollow, bloodshot eyes. I am sorry, Nia, he choked out, dropping to his knees right there on the courtroom floor. I was desperate. Chloe manipulated me. She poisoned my mind against you. Just pay the $5 million to the lenders. I will work for you. I will sign over my future wages. I will do whatever you demand. Please do not let those men find me. I looked at the three of them groveling at my feet. A mother who valued social status over her daughter's sanity. A father who valued a fake legacy over the truth. A brother who was entirely willing to sacrifice my freedom to cover his catastrophic gambling debts. Their apologies were utterly meaningless. They were empty words fueled by pure, unadulterated terror. They were not sorry for abusing me. They were not sorry for trying to lock me in a psychiatric ward. They were only sorry that their golden ticket to salvation had just slammed the vault door shut in their faces. I did not offer them a single word of comfort. I simply turned my back on their pathetic displays of desperation and walked calmly over to the defense table. My bronze Navy cross was still resting exactly where I had left it. I picked up the heavy metal, feeling its solid, undeniable weight in the palm of my hand. With slow, deliberate precision, I pinned the metal back onto the lapel of my black silk blazer. It sat perfectly over my heart, a shining emblem of resilience that they had so foolishly tried to strip away. I turned to face my ruined family one last time. Vivian was still weeping on the floor. Harold looked completely hollowed out. Marcus was sobbing into his hands, entirely consumed by the violent reality of his rapidly approaching fate. You told me earlier that this metal was just a piece of scrap metal, I said, my voice cutting through their pathetic cries with absolute chilling clarity. But the people who wear this uniform are taught a very specific set of rules regarding engagement and survival. The most important rule is the one you completely forgot when you decided to launch a hostile takeover of my life. My family looked up at me, their faces pale and streaked with terrified tears. We do not negotiate with traitors, I stated, my words ringing with absolute finality. You orchestrated your own destruction to protect a lie. Now you get to survive the consequences entirely on your own. I picked up my leather briefcase and turned away from them forever. I walked straight down the center aisle of the courtroom. My heels clicked against the marble floor in a steady, victorious rhythm. I did not look back at the frantic shouting erupting behind me. I did not care about the syndicate coming for Marcus or the total financial bankruptcy awaiting my parents. They were ghosts to me now. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the courtroom, stepping into the main corridor. The massive glass entrance of the building loomed ahead. As I stepped through the front doors, the brilliant, blinding afternoon sunlight washed over me, warm and absolute. I walked out into the radiant Washington air, my head held high, leaving the rotting, collapsed ashes of the Jackson family in the dark where they belonged. I did not need them. I was a sovereign empire, and my reign had just begun.